Hello and welcome to the One Life Church devotional series. We cover the entire Bible in 20 months. Well, today's chapters are James 3 and Proverbs 25. Well, I'm on my last day on my trip down here to Melbourne, in the home of the Cahards who lead this great church down here. We've had a great time of ministry. But this is a very sobering verse for people like the Cahards and myself. Now, many of you should become teachers, my fellow believers, because you know that those who teach will be judged more strictly. God doesn't let people get away with telling people to do something and then doing something differently. In other words, being a hypocrite. You know how Jesus spoke about hypocrites. And so be very, very careful if you tell people how to live. And then he moves on to describe the power of the tongue. He says, like horses have a bit in their mouth that direct them. Ships have a rudder that direct them. Likewise, the tongue. The tongue directs our lives. And then he says the tongue is a restless evil, full of deadly poison. Who can tame the tongue? He follows on this analogy saying, can both fresh water and salt water come from the same spring? He's getting us to the point of where is the control mechanism of the tongue? It's actually not in your mind. You think your mind controls the tongue. That's how you put a guard on your tongue. He's saying, no. Your tongue is fed from a spring. And the spring is deep within your heart. If you harbor, he says in verse 14, bitter envy, selfish ambition in your heart, you wind up boasting about it. It'll come out of your heart. And so basically, verse 18, this is how he ends chapter 3. Peacemakers sow in peace, and they reap a harvest of righteousness. In other words, if you have peace in your heart, you will sow peace, and then you will reap righteousness. And so this whole chapter is about the power of the tongue, which is driven from the heart. And then we know that, well, how do you solve the heart problem? Well, you can't solve your heart problem. David knew he couldn't solve his heart problem. Psalm 51, he said, God, create in me a clean heart. Renew a right spirit within me. And so our heart needs to be consecrated to the Lord. The Holy Spirit comes upon our heart when we surrender it to Jesus Christ. And that's how we get government over our tongue, when our heart changes. Well, now let's go for verse 1 of Proverbs 25. These are the Proverbs of Solomon compiled by the men of Hezekiah. It is the glory of God to conceal a matter, and to search out a matter is the glory of kings. It's amazing that God plays like a dad playing hide and seek with his kids. I'm in the backyard here of the Cahards. Now the Cahards have got 2 kids, and then they've got 2 younger kids. I'm pretty certain they would have had treasure hunts in this garden as these kids grew up, hiding things that they could find. And that's how God is with us. He doesn't just lay out all the truths of the universe on, a platter for us to take. No. He wants us to seek them out like a child looking for his dad and a child looking for treasure. That's what that verse says. And then he moves on to governance, and he says, remove wicked officials from the king's presence, and his throne will be established in righteousness. Now, our country back home in South Africa, we know this is what our president's trying to do right now, isn't he? Trying to move out the rot from government structures so that the company and country may be judged and ruled rightly. The same applies in business. You've got a rotten egg in the management structure. You need to move them aside so that good governance can take place. And then he says, it's something quite interesting, and Jesus quotes this particular proverb. It is better for him to say, come up here. In other words, don't exalt yourself in the king's presence and claim a place among great men. For it is better for him to say, come up here, than to humiliate you and say, no, this is not your place. Go sit at the bottom of the table. Jesus said the same thing in Luke 14. So in other words, what's Jesus saying there? Don't promote yourself. Don't promote yourself. That's going to wind up bad for you. Then he moves on to say, don't take people hastily to court. That's also not a good idea. Think it through before you do such a thing. And like a broken tooth or a lame foot is the reliance of the unfaithful in times of trouble. You need around yourself people you can rely on. And then The very last verse I want to look at today is verse 21. If your enemy is hungry, give him food to eat. If he's thirsty, give him water to drink. In doing this, you heap burning coals on his head, and the Lord rewards you. Now, Jesus said a similar thing, didn't he? And I've always thought when we read that it meant that when you're kind to someone who's not kind to you, you're hurting them by being kind, like pouring hot coal on a head. Like on my head, that would be pretty bleak. But it doesn't mean that. It means that being in the old days when their fire went out, what they would sometimes do is go from house to house and ask for coals from their neighbors and put it into a receptacle and carry it home. That's what it is. Stock them up with good things so that you're good for him. Jesus teaches us, encourages us to behave in the opposite spirit. That's what that verse is about.